theological seminary in Islam. Palestinians burn West Bank YMCA, follows Muslim warnings for Christian group to leave Hamas-controlled town or see violence. Does the NCC ever acknowledge do you know that the erasure of Christianity from Palestinian life, does that matter to anybody? In Bethlehem, rather revered city for Christians, the Christians are virtually gone. They just had to leave because of all the violence against Christians by fellow Palestinians. And one of the questions I've always asked is, if Israeli occupation causes terrorism, why are no Christian Palestinians blowing themselves up? Not one. They're just as occupied as Muslim Palestinians. That was one of my 5 questions in the LA Times article. I was called a bigot for that article by a Muslim leader, a bigot for asking the most honest, fair questions. I couched it in as respectful terms I could. You can't ask questions. Forget you can't say bad. You can't even ask questions. The Mufti of Egypt. The Mufti of Egypt. The true face of the blood-sucking Hebrew entity has been exposed. A serious part of the Muslim world believes that in the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and the serious part of the Middle East believes that Jews do take non-Jewish children and slaughter them for Passover and use their blood for matzah. It's endless, and we're not allowed to ask the questions. In Turkey, which is the most secularized of all the Islamic states because of the Ataturk revolution in the early 20th century, Times of London, December 2nd, 2006, Protestant missionaries face 9 years for insult to Islam. Can you imagine if we arrested Americans insulting Christianity? There would only be Christians outside of the jail. Christianity's insulted all the time. It's the norm. You know, so many films that will depict religious people as buffoons, as hypocrites, as really behind the veneer of piety, actually molesting children and so on. You could put a crucifix into the artist's urine, and you then have a work of art at a major museum and gallery. Imagine if we arrested, it doesn't even occur to us we'll arrest somebody for saying something anti-Christian. It doesn't occur to us. And it shouldn't, because it's a free country. But the thing is, that's why I'm so worried. Freedom, according to Jefferson, comes from God. It doesn't come from man. Liberty comes from God. That's what this country was founded to believe. Look, I could go on, unfortunately, I could go on. I'll give you one more example, one that I raised that had an impact on Minnesota because of, or Minneapolis, St. Paul. So I'm popular, my radio station there, my show there is popular. In Minneapolis, Muslim taxi drivers would refuse to take fares that had a beer or a wine bottle that they got at duty free and they came on carrying or whatever. And they would refuse to take them. And needless to say, Minneapolis gave in. They didn't say, excuse me, you take people who have wine with them, or you don't be a taxi driver. If you're not prepared to take every non-violent passenger, then find another line of work. That's the obvious answer to that. Let me tell you how powerful this was. I raised this on the air, as I told you. And it caused a hubbub in Minneapolis, and apparently they said, first they defended their policy, the Transportation Commission, and then finally they said, well, you have to take it. And then there was a Muslim leader said, this is bigotry. There's an article in USA Today by a Muslim leader. It is bigoted to demand that a Muslim taxi driver take a passenger who has wine. This is another example of Islamophobia, right? But let me show you now why it's worrisome. I raised this issue on the air, and you know, I learned so much from callers. I tell you, it's the great education of my life, calls and emails. And there was a caller, a Christian mailman in Denver, and he said, Dennis, well, you know, I'll give you an example of how this applies to me, but I understand my job is as a mailman. I deliver the raunchiest pornography to home after home. That's at least as much against my Christianity as wine is against that taxi driver's Islam. And moreover, that he didn't even deliver it. I deliver it. But he said, that's my job. If I can't deliver what a free country allows people to order by mail, then I shouldn't be a mailman. If I win people over to my Christian way of life, it will be through persuasion and living a good life. Not by forcing people. Can you imagine if mailmen didn't deliver what they disagreed with? Can you imagine? Right, I mean, just imagine that. Imagine a conservative mailman. Hey, I'm not bringing the Times to anybody. You can almost have a funny skit based on it. Everybody chooses which they'll deliver. Or what about, I mean, even if you don't subscribe, you get Victoria's Secret. You just have to breathe and you get Victoria's Secret. I think, actually, my theory is that Victoria's Secret should be contacted. How they get everybody's name and address. They are better than the government. They find you when you move. How did they know? How did they know? I just bought the house. Dennis Prager. It's a phenomenon. All right, so finally, are there solutions? Well, the first thing is there can't be any solution if we are going to be weak as the liberal media are on this matter. And it's a tragedy, and as our universities are even more obsequious. So the first thing is, before anything else, we have to acknowledge that there is an issue. If there's no issue, if we're going to be told, as Karen Armstrong, the ex-nun, who is apparently still annoyed with the church and has taken it out on the West in her works, which are almost regarded as holy secular works, she's one of the many who lump all fundamentalisms together. Oh, fundamentalist Muslim, fundamentalist Jew, fundamentalist Christian, they're all the same, reject modernity. I don't know, for some reason I feel a little more secure among fundamentalist Christians as a non-Christian than I do among fundamentalist Muslims as a non-Muslim. I'm not being sarcastic, I mean, but is that an unfair statement? Is there anything bigoted about it? If it's bigoted, I don't want to say it. I say before God and man, I want to be proven wrong. I want to believe the best. What is my vested interest, folks, in wanting to believe that there is a threat from a significant part, whatever percentage it is, of 1 billion people? Do you think I want to believe that? I want my children to inherit that world? But I can't deny what I read to you. I can't deny these are not all bizarre little things taken from obscure places. So the first thing is we have to recognize. But the biggest is, there are two things. One, outsiders have to be kind and firm. You have a problem. We will not deny it. We are not going to bend over in cowardice because of this lie called Islamophobia. That's the first thing the outsider does. But the biggest solution must come from Muslims. Otherwise, there's no hope. It can't come from the outside. It has to come from inside. And the first thing that Muslims have to do is not feel threatened. Who's threatening you? Who exactly is threatening you? We spilled blood to save Muslim lives in Bosnia, didn't we? We gave a lot of treasure to save Muslim lives in Afghanistan when the Soviets were bombing like crazy. My first public demonstration that I organized was on behalf of Muslims in Afghanistan. How ironic. Because I knew of the slaughter that was taking place by the Soviets and what they did to the Afghan people. Who's threatening? Who is threatening you? No one. No one. So stop being worried. You can't threaten 1 billion people anyway. It's not possible. You can threaten 13 million, the number of Jews there are, but you can't threaten 1 billion. So stop with this victim status. Oh, 13 imams weren't allowed onto a plane. Oh, U.S. Airways is Islamophobic. Delta's Islamophobic. Qantas is Islamophobic. Well, everything's Islamophobic. And it turned out on the imam thing, by the way, that the imams, I think it was U.S. Airways, was perfectly right in what it did. After all the investigations were conducted, bending over backwards to look for bigotry, turned out that they had total legitimacy to do what they did on the airline. You're not threatened, dear Muslim. You are not. People who want to make a lot of money and who are angry and who have decided to take over Islamic organizations, the angry are speaking on your behalf, and that's never healthy. Never healthy. Don't ever let the angry be your leaders. And they don't represent the vast majority of Muslims. I bet half of America's Muslims never heard of CARE. But for the press, they represent Muslims. All of a sudden. Were American Muslims ever in history a target of any bigoted statements or attacks? Who cares? You come from Pakistan? Terrific. Welcome. Fine, thank you. You speak Spanish? My second appeal to Muslims is to adopt my favorite motto, and that is, there are only two races, the decent and the indecent. Don't divide the world between Muslim and infidel. That's the worst possible thing you can do morally. It's an evil doctrine. Of course there are people who don't believe as you do, so fine. But you still have to measure the non-Muslim by their behavior, not by their faith.
We need the air conditioner.
We certainly do, I agree, but I don't know any way to do that? Yeah. I agree with you, sir. I keep my studio at 62, you would enjoy it. Number 3. Yeah, you got a free book from me.
I already bought it, I got my money back.
Oh. Now to show how fair I am, are you Jewish? The question suggested a certain ethnic persuasion. There you go. Number 3. There is a huge amount of emphasis among Muslims these days on honor. The Prophet is dishonored if there are cartoons. The ease with which Muslims feel dishonored, and honor is a very big deal. If your daughter doesn't marry who you want, then you're dishonored. And that's why they're called honor killings if it's of a daughter or a sister. And how about redefining honor as moral behavior? That you honor Islam not by getting angry over the way a non-Muslim depicts Muhammad. How can somebody outside dishonor him? If somebody painted a silly painting of Moses, would I get annoyed? It doesn't make sense to me. All the movies depicting Jesus in some cockamamie ways are Christians walking around disturbed. They don't go to the movie, or they go and they write a letter to the editor, and then they go to church on Sunday. And it's not a big deal. This honor, this notion of everything, always dishonored, it has to go. It's childish. It's childish. Mature people don't think that way. Certainly people who have a sense of self and identity. How fragile could your identity be that a Danish newspaper causes you to burn buildings? Oh, the story from Nigeria, which I told in a column a couple of years ago, they had either the Miss Universe or the Miss World contest. in Lagos, Nigeria. Nigeria is about half Muslim, half Christian. And then it's a lot of problems there as a result. So the Nigerian government wanted attention. I mean, how are you going to get attention? We have an international conference on numismatics. They have a Miss Universe cup. People show up, right? I mean, that's the way life is. You like it, don't like it, that's reality. People rather see bathing beauties from around the world than coins from around the world. So Lagos, Nigeria decides, Nigeria has the Miss, I don't know, World or Universe contest. So Muslim leaders in Nigeria were very angry and called and wrote and declared that these women are all whores. All these contestants from around the world are all whores. And we cannot allow this in Nigeria. So a young woman, a woman in her 20s at a Nigerian newspaper, wrote a piece where she said, and it was utterly, I saw the piece, totally respectful. She said, they're not whores. In fact, they're mostly very sweet young women, beautiful, sweet young women, and in fact, I'll bet the Prophet Muhammad would like to take one for a wife. Now, all right, you the all, but I'll tell you something. As a man, I thought that was the biggest compliment. Any guy who was said, oh, he could have any Miss Universe contestant he wants, guys will have, wow, that's quite a guy, right? I mean, that's how men, that's the highest compliment you could give a man. Oh, you could have Miss Sweden for a wife, Miss Latvia, Miss Panama, just pick it. So it was meant as a compliment to the women, and that Muhammad himself would not find them whore-like. Well, needless to say, all the editorial offices of that newspaper were burned down, and she was threatened with death and fled Nigeria. I don't know if we even know where she is today for writing that. All the honor, dishonor, 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 dishonor. What other religion has so much possibility, or what other religious group, I can't say religion, what other religious group has so much the possibility of dishonor? If Israel had a Miss World contest and some rabbi said we shouldn't have that here because it's not modest or whatever reason, and then some Israeli Jew wrote, you know what, these are really nice women, Moses himself would have taken one for a wife. The most Orthodox Jew would not find that offensive. In fact, he'd want to be more Moses-like. The proof is that the rabbi here is cracking up. That's the truth. We're allowed to joke about ourselves because we're secure enough. This notion that everything dishonors. What? This is terrible. This is terrible. Morality matters, not this petty dishonoring. Number 4. Where is the Islamic equivalent of Chilul Hashem, of desecrating God's name as the greatest sin? How is there no large demonstration of religious leaders in Islam saying if you slaughter an innocent and say Allahu Akbar, you go to hell? You don't honor Allah, you in fact disgrace Allah when you say that. Where is that? Where is it? Am I asking for the moon? I pray to God I'm not. Number 5, self-criticism. Christians and Jews have industries of self-criticism. You can make a very good living. Right? Where is it? Where is it? All these organizations do is find reasons to show why we're being attacked. Poor us, poor us. My God, cab drivers, look at what they're doing to Muslim cab drivers. Look at what they're doing to the imams. Where is the self-criticism? And finally, a thought. One final thought, and it has to do with Jews. When I have asked, I've done this now twice on my radio show, I said, you know that every so often, relatively rarely, I won't say much. I realize now. That's obvious. And all I will do is say, folks, I'm just a telephone operator this hour. I want you to answer a question, and I will simply take your calls. And I've done this twice on this issue. If you're a Christian who supports Israel and the Jewish people, I want you to call in and just say why. I will not make any comments. All I want to know is why. The lines light up instantaneously, and Christian after Christian from all over the country will say why they support the Jews in Israel. And one common denominator, there are many reasons, but a very common denominator is the belief among believing Christians that God really meant it when he said, I will bless those who bless the Jews and curse those who curse them, specifically to Abraham. I happen to believe, oddly enough, I'm Jewish and I even believe that that's true. As I say to Jewish audiences so often, oh God, if only you believe in the Torah as much as Christians did. And so I believe that that's true, that God blesses those who bless the Jews and curses those who curse the Jews. I really do believe it. And in fact, I wrote a column. My column is not a religious column. I wrote my syndicated column 2 years ago, making a secular, historical case for that position. That societies that have blessed the Jews have been blessed, societies that have cursed the Jews have been cursed. And I gave a number of examples, and I'll give you just two. One, the United States of America has blessed the Jews more than any country in history, and it is undeniable we are the most blessed country in history. I am utterly convinced they are related. Utterly, I don't say that they are the only thing, but they are related. I believe that if America abandoned Israel and the Jews, you could date it at that time the decline of the United States of America. I am absolutely convinced of that. And who curses the Jews the most right now in our time? The Arab world. And to be honest, the Arab world, and I wish I had Friedman's column here, he quotes a Syrian saying, we are the backward place of the world, we Arabs. We give nothing constructive to the world. Quoting a Syrian saying that. It's a benighted place, much of the Arab world today. Half of it believes that it wasn't Arabs who attacked on 9/11. When you can't recognize truth and believe grand lies, it's a very bad sign of a civilization. It's a bad sign that we have a certain percentage that believes that the government knocked down the trade towers. It's not a good sign, very bad sign. But it's not half or more. Therefore, I am absolutely convinced that the day that the Muslim world makes peace with Judaism will mark its turning point. Ironically, it hates the Jews today, much of the Muslim world, from Ahmadinejad, the Shiite, to the Sunnis in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. But in fact, if it could see, and there is one imam in Italy, there is an imam in Italy who is a Zionist. Just as there were Christian Zionists, there are who were dominant in Christian circles in parts of the West. There is this one in Rome. So of course God gave this land to the Jews. We believe in that text too. Whatever your political position on a settlement, Israeli-Palestinian settlement, that's not the point here. The point is making peace with the fact that the Jews have a claim there. Arafat did not. As he said, Jesus was a Palestinian. It's a very famous line of his. He could not utter the words, Jesus was a Jew, lest that acknowledge how long the Jews were there so many centuries before there was even an Islam, or Arabs had gone beyond the Arabian Peninsula. That will mark a turning point in the history of the Islamic world, when it can make peace with, to the extent that there are Jewish origins. Just as Christians say we are grafted onto the Jewish tree, while it is not the same thing because Muhammad was not a Jew, as Jesus was, nevertheless, how many people know that Muhammad fasted on Yom Kippur? Very few. How many Muslims know that? Almost none. It was only changed to Ramadan when the Jews did not accept Muhammad. He fasted on Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement. He prayed toward Jerusalem. Again, turned it to Mecca after the Jews did not accept it. There are very powerful Jewish origins to the Quran and to Islam. If Islam can turn itself around vis-a-vis the Jews, it will mark its return, or its growth into the world that we all want the Muslim to live in. But to say these things, my dear friends, is actually to be a friend of Muslims. That's the irony. This speech was not given by an Islamophone. And in their hearts, every Muslim who came on my show knows it. Thank you for listening. Very much, thank you, and to give you a chance to stretch too. Double function. We're going to take, is that right, Rabbi? We'll take a couple of questions, or was it late? You've got a mic there. Let me say a word, if I may. It's very important to me. Is this your brochure? This is it? Yeah. All right, can people have it there?
Yeah.
This is the easiest time I've ever had to say good words about a Chabad, because you saw the strength of conviction and character of the rabbi who runs this particular Chabad house here in Yorba Linda. Not many people are willing to go out on a limb as he did with the issue of me and care. In fact, very few. That's the kind of people who run this place. And for those of you in particular, it was so good before. The other mic? Okay. Those of you in particular, those of you who are Jews. A word here. I'm going to tell you a story. Rabbi, you're going to like this story a lot. So much you probably want to use it, and I mean it very sincerely. But maybe the shame will go, maybe go. When I was doing Religion on the Line on KABC, one day, the head of the station at the time, a man whom I owe a great deal to, George Green, called me into his office. And I always had a little lump in my throat. He didn't call me much, and could have been, all right, thank you, and have a great life. That was my first thought, because I had no idea why. He said, Dennis, I got a question. I thought that was good. Okay. I said, Dennis, I have a question here. There's something that doesn't make any sense. I said, there was a woman who preceded you as the moderator of Religion on the Line. And this woman never once acknowledged that she was a Jew. And didn't have, her name was Hemingway. Hardly a Jewish name. And I kept getting anti-Jewish, even anti-Semitic letters against her. You, every show mentioned you're a Jew, you're a religious Jew, and I've never in 5 years gotten one anti-Jewish letter about you. It doesn't make sense. They all know you're Jewish, and I got not one. No, I don't even know how anybody knew, and I got a lot. I said, well, George, I felt like, Joseph being called before Pharaoh. Pharaoh? I mean, George? I think I know the answer. Non-Jews trust Jewish Jews more than they trust non-Jewish Jews. Non-Jews trust Jewish Jews more than they trust non-Jewish Jews. I got it right. I mean, I didn't get it right the first time. No. You didn't understand it the first time. That's a very big deal. I say this to the Jews in this audience. A lot of Jews became non-Jewish Jews because they were just raised with nothing. That's all. Maybe they got a bar mitzvah in a little Hebrew school to make them a little anti-Semitic. But I say to everybody, because I get a lot of letters about people who tell me they came back to their Methodist church or their Catholic church thanks to me, and it fills my heart with joy that I have helped somebody go back to their religious roots. But there is no organization that does for Jews what Chabad does, because you need your religious roots, whatever your religion, you need them. I don't know how people fare in life without it. I think it's part of their confusion, it's part of their moral confusion, it's part of their emotional confusion. We need it more than ever. Affluence does not negate the need for God and religiosity and so on. And to know, but the first thing is in Jewish life is to know what it is. If you want to reject it, at least there were two terms in the Hebrew. There's what's the heretic word? Apikoros. In Judaism, if a guy denies and scoffs at the Torah and belief and so on, he call him an apikoros. But in order to get to be an apikoros, you have to have knowledge. The worst thing in Jewish life is not to be an apikoros, to be an am haaretz. It's to be ignorant. Lo am haaretz chasid. You have to know, at least know what you're rejecting. And I must say to you, and I'm not paid to do this, and I always volunteer at Chabad to do this, and this man has earned his stripes with you, certainly. I would really strongly suggest that you take some of the courses here. What have you got to lose? You can always TiVo what you missed out. You think about it. So there's no excuse anymore. So that's why they gave out this brochure, and I envy you having him in your community. So keep up your great work. So now time for questions, comments, and brief opening speeches. But I guess there's a mic, people to line up. Is that it? So come up here and speak into the mic. Is that you? Yeah? All right, you can turn it on. Okay, sorry, hey, come around, because people are lining up. Come, you back there, yeah.
Why did the Pope grovel?
Why did the Pope grovel? Well, he apologized, he didn't grovel. He did not use the words, I don't think he said I'm sorry, he said I'm sorry if I offended anybody. And he said, by the way, far more difficult things than I did. The man, I think part of it is there's a very big fear in the Vatican for the lives of a lot of Christians in Muslim countries. They feel that they are almost hostages. But I don't think anybody took the recanting terribly seriously. I think he did a very courageous thing. In fact, he raised issues. I've always loved John Paul II. John Paul II, I'm sorry, John the 23rd. JP2, John Paul II, if you didn't love the man, there's something wrong with you. But I think that this Pope, as a Pope, is a greater Pope.
Yes.
So that's my own read as an outsider. And that John Paul II would never have confronted like he did.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question is this, the Islamists that are causing all the bad problems around the world claim they're following the Quran, which says, kill the Jew, kill the Christian, and when we go into a country, if they don't accept Islam, then we murder them. So how could they behave otherwise?
That's the question that those who disagree with me, when I say I don't judge religion, just practitioners, that's one of the questions they would ask. And that is where a Muslim has the choice. Do you read it as prescription, this is what I must do now, or what was necessary at a given time historically under certain circumstances? That is a choice that a Muslim can make, how he wants to read that. And so that really is your choice. And look, I mean, to be honest, there are people who read the Bible and used it to defend slavery. And there were people who read the Bible and used it to abolish slavery. That's why we have to ask, what does God most want? That's why I love Micah's statement. Oh man, God has told you what he wants. To love justice, to act mercifully and walk humbly with your God. We need guiding principles in religion. Here is my final word on that, because this has always troubled me, this question of bad religious people in any religion. And here it is. If you want to be good, and believe God wants you to be good, then your religion can make you good. But if you don't believe that God most wants you to be good, then you can do a lot of terrible things. And we have that belief in Judaism. There is an unbelievable phrase. Leviticus has this following, the book of Leviticus, third book of the Torah, third book of the Bible. It says, "You shall be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy." And the way you learn scripture in Jewish school, which is a great way, that's how I read a newspaper to this day, is you ask questions about the text. So the rabbis ask the question, why does it say be holy? Isn't it enough to just follow the commands of the Torah and you'll be holy? Why do you need this general principle? And a major rabbinic figure called the Ramban Nachmanides said, because you could be disgusting with the permission of the Torah. Menuval b'Shutat Torah. It's an astonishing statement from an orthodox source. Just like driving. You could follow every driving rule and be a rude and disgusting driver. Rules don't do it alone. You have to want to be good, and you have to believe God wants you to be good. A Muslim who believes that God foremost wants him to be good can use, I believe, his texts to make him better. But right now, I want to find them. We're all aching to meet a lot of them. Yes?
I've got a line for you. If you use it in your show, I want 2 books and a refund.
2 books and a refund?
Partial riddle, then I'll explain it. But what would the air conditioner have to do, the air conditioner in this room, have to do with the spread of terror and radical Islam in the world?
If somebody put in some toxic, no, what?
We sat in this room roasting. People were taking off their sweaters. Western, particularly Western religious society is enormously polite and afraid to speak up. You get my point?
Yeah. No, that's not an invalid point. We really do bend over backwards not to offend.
Not hurt people's feelings.
Yeah, that's right. It's a fair point, and we are grateful to you. No
One of my regulars.
Yes, please.
Here's my question. I was struck by, I didn't read the article, but I was struck by a summary of Thomas Friedman's article. And his provocative question, why do Muslims kill Muslims? And I thought it...
No, it was really, why are Muslims quiet when Muslims kill Muslims?
All right, well, why are Muslims quiet when they kill Muslims? And I probably misunderstood that. But I also feel that that indicated this possibly the supine nature of the press, because I think in many instances, people like Thomas Friedman know the answer. And that is, fellow Muslims are not allowed to criticize Muslims. And, well, I actually stood up to say that it was kill Muslims because many people have asked otherwise, why do Muslims kill Muslims? And the answer to that one is that God will know they're Muslims when they die, and they will go to paradise. And that was the scariest. That's why it's okay for Muslims to have killed fellow Muslims on 9/11, on many, many times since. And I just thought, I think questions like that, to which I think some journalists know the answer, is evidence of them not really confronting it.
Yeah.
The answer is harder than the question he was getting at. That's what I'm saying.
It's a very fair point, but I tell you, he was still light years ahead of almost anyone else in the press by even raising the question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Part of my question, my answer is, first I'd like to sort of preface it by mentioning something that I don't think anybody would be surprised if you walk into, say, a lion's cage with some food and a membership card to PETA and say that you've donated thousands of dollars to rescue lions that should be eaten. And it's because lions don't think the same way we do. And I think perhaps Muslims are the same way. They've been indoctrinated in such a manner that they think in terms of things totally different than we do. And when you try to, or anybody tries to, project our feelings or our reactions or our way of doing things to Muslims and expect them to be ashamed of what they do in terms of what we think, I think that's wrong. I think they think totally differently.
Well, you know, it's very interesting. I made the point on my show today that conservatives are much more likely to be called Islamophobic because they do confront these questions than liberals are. But it's only, by and large, conservatives who believe that the greatest desire in the Arab world is for liberty and freedom. Isn't that ironic? The liberal is arguing you can't bring liberty to the Arab world. They're just not ready. It's not. They don't value this stuff, and we're just, you know, let's get out of there. So it's so ironic here that the ones called Islamophobic have a more optimistic view of that part of the world than the ones who are for diversity and tolerance and multiculturalism. It's part of how upside down the world is. Yes.
It was good to hear you without a commercial.
Oh. This should make you feel good. It was good to talk without it. By the way, you can all remedy that. You just pay the fee for those minutes, and I'll be happy to have a commercial-free hour. But somebody has to pay the engineer, forgetting even me. There's a lot of overhead.
You gave us 6 things that you thought could happen. What about a 7th one? What about if, I don't know how everybody else feels about this here, but what about if you consider running for, say, the Senate?
I did consider it, and I think I made the right decision that I would have more of an effect on radio than that doesn't preclude the possibility in the future that I might do something so silly. But I don't know. That's in God's hands. Somehow or other, I'll see which is the best way to do it. I would like really though. I want to write. You know what? You'll help me decide. I have 2 books that I'm really. I have like 6 books that I have a tug of war among, but there are 2 in particular. Don't raise your hand until you hear the case for each, and then vote which you'd like me to write first. One is the case for Judeo-Christian values, why it is so important for America to retain them, what they are, because most people who even believe in them can't articulate them. And that's one. And the other one is totally different. It is male sexual nature. And the reason that I would even put that on the par of the other is, some of you may have heard me on the subject on the radio. I cannot tell you how many women and men, but especially women, will write to me or meet me at a speech and tell me that hearing me explain their husband has incredibly helped their marriage. And having their daughter hear my tapes on male sexual nature had them for the first time understand the way guys look at them. And I realized your husband won't tell you what I will. Because if he did, you'd say he's sick. That's the reason men don't open up to their wives. They are desperately afraid she'll think I'm sick. So I am so used to being pummeled publicly, it doesn't matter, and I'm punished. So I can handle it, and so those are the 2 books. So now that you've heard the case for both, which would you rather I write first? Those for the Judeo-Christian values, raise your hand. Those for male sexuality, raise your hand. number one support. Are we ready? Thank you very much. Please listen to Rabbi.
Ladies and gentlemen, just a short word. Again, I want to thank Dennis for driving down and fighting the traffic from Los Angeles to come all the way down to the hinterlands of Orange County. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. I want to thank the patrons who helped support this wonderful event. I also want to thank Rabbi Levy and Naomi Bulsovsky, who worked tirelessly to help make it a success, together with Debbie and Yosef and all the other volunteers. And I also want to thank many of you here in this room tonight who helped build this wonderful building. We still got a little bit to go. I still got to raise a few $100,000. But nevertheless, that we went on a very ambitious course some months ago, 18 months ago, to start construction on this building. And Baruch Hashem, we see, thank God, we see the tremendous blessing which has come from it. As they say, they shall build it and they will come, and thank God you all came this evening. Thank you very much, and we hope you come back one day.